Hello,
Hi,
welcome to
everyone.
Managing Your Accounts and Finances with Clio. My name is James and I'm joined here on the stage by Amrit. Why don't we start by introducing ourselves? So I have been at Clio for nearly 4 years now. When I first started at Clio, I was in the support department as a technical escalations agent, where I helped customers with kind of the most intense accounting issues they had. So I got to work with a lot of lawyers and paralegals and accountants and bookkeepers, and I got to see kind of how they worked and help them get their books into shape in both Clio and their accounting software. That taught me a lot about legal workflows as well as accounting workflows and kind of the things that are necessary in both of those. And then after a couple years, I worked my way into the engineering department, where I'm now a software developer on the Clio payments team.
Hi, everyone. My name's Amrit Minhas. I am a financial accountant at Clio. I've been there for just over a year now, after having completed my experience portion of my designation and the education portion. I wanted to take what I had learned as an accountant and come join Clio and help continue to build itself as a leading company in legal tech. What do I do at Clio? What I do splits itself into two portions. So one, I'm a puzzle piece in building the monthly financial statements. And secondly, I work on creating operational efficiencies within the company. I absolutely love human beings and I love building things. And I love it when the two worlds come together and I get to work with diverse and intelligent teams to create efficiencies within the company. Taking that same mentality, I want to share that with our clients. How can Clio help our clients make better business decisions? And that's why I'm here today.
So, why are we on stage excited to talk about accounting? Well, we both really would like to kind of emphasize the need for good tools and data in order to help you make, and lawyers everywhere, make better decisions about how they can grow their business. So, we went too far. So I'd like to, we're excited to kind of give you guys some tools to work through that. Taking a step back, though, I'd like to emphasize the importance of accurate data. Clio absolutely loves data. We love to see the things that we need to interpret kind of our future and what the best way to make decisions for our future are. So it helps us make better, more effective, and more efficient business decisions. And where we are today is a combination of a lot of data and a lot of work spent understanding that data. But in order to get honest answers from our data, we had to be honest about the data that we put in. We had to look at everything and make sure that when we were recording things, we were telling the truth, and it wasn't just the good stuff. Coming back to where what we're going to do here today, we're going to take a look at a few financial indicators of health and how they can help you determine what you maybe need to do for your business.
Alrighty, so first, James will start off the conversation chatting about managing professional fees. How can Clio help you attain your most accurate revenue numbers? It's important to know what we need to get right from the start.
Next up, Amrit's going to go through managing reimbursable expenses, looking through some of the differences that Clio does in distinguishing hard and soft costs, and basically managing anything that you'll be reimbursed for.
And then I'll push it right back to James, and he'll have a conversation about QuickBooks, how to set it up, what the online sync looks like, and then we'll even chat about Xero and Client, a couple other accounting softwares that we do have relationships with.
Finally, Amrit's going to take a look at using some of this information to determine profit, and then some tips on how we can increase that number.
We all want to increase that number.
And we'll finish up with some time to answer some questions about your accounting needs. So, to start off, though, I want to introduce you the equation that we'll be using to guide us on this journey to profit. To start with, like Amrit said, we're going to get the first number we're going to get is a professional fee. So this is all of the time that you're entering as you work and do your lawyer stuff. Next up, we've got all of the reimbursable expenses that anything that that is provided and that we will be reimbursed for. And those two numbers put together get us to our revenue. Now, revenue is often the focal point of growth conversations, and lawyers seem to agree that we want to focus on this number. Once we have that number, we can take off any operating expenses, so anything to do with running a business like rent, and that leaves us with our profit. So, let's get started. Let's take a look at managing professional fees. We're going to look at some data entry tips, how to report on our receivables, and finally some collection tips and those tough to collect situations. To start with, we highly recommend that you track your time as you work. This goes back to what I was talking about with ensuring that your data is accurate. You have plenty of chances to change how you bill, how that ends up in front of your client, but you only really have this one chance to be absolutely sure that the data that you're entering is correct. So we recommend using Clio's timers and taking notes as you go. That way, you know that whatever you entered was what you actually did. Another helpful feature is using activity categories. What this helps with in particular is keeping track of the specific work that you do by category. So even though the rates here might all be the same and you're not actually changing that, later on you'll be able to report on categories of work and see what your firm is spending the most time on. Another new feature that we've just recently added is this non-billable time. This goes again back to this idea of being honest with your data. This is for time that you spent that you know you can't bill, that's not going to end up on a bill, but it's part of your workday. So by including this non-billable check mark here, you're saying that this time entry won't end up on a bill, but it lets you see an accurate picture of the time that you're spending. It's really easy to be optimistic about how productive we are. So if we're honest, we can find those situations where maybe we can get a little bit more time out of the day. Speaking of recording time as you go, using Clio's mobile app lets you record time even when you're out and about and it's not necessarily appropriate to pull out a laptop. I understand it's also not always appropriate to pull out a phone, but the sooner that you can get this data into Clio, the easier it is on you because it reduces that mental overhead of remembering exactly what happened and then entering it later. Finally, now that we have recorded impeccably detailed time entries, we've done all of our work, and we've sent those bills to the client, it's time to get a picture of what we're owed. And we can do that using Clio's accounts receivable report. Now, if you have a connection with accounting software, you'll be able to get that from there as well, but Clio additionally lets you filter out by a responsible attorney, your matter, and your practice area. So you can see the breakdown by those different areas. We can see here how Clio breaks it down by the client and matter and shows you the total for each of those sections. And then at the very bottom, it would show you your total receivables overall. Now, this is great for getting that high-level overview, but more often, it's important for lawyers to see who's paying their bills and who isn't. So, for that, we've got our AR aging report. This will tell you how old these receivables are, basing it on the date of when they were billed. So, it's pretty clear who's paying their bills and who isn't. You can see in this case that Hyatt Stober has a whole bunch of receivables in the 91 plus days column. With this information, we can kind of make decisions on whether or not we want to continue work for this client at this time, or potentially create some situations that we can recoup some of these costs. One of the first things that can be very helpful for lawyers in ensuring that this doesn't get into this state is by taking trust up front. Now, trust is complicated. There's probably different rules in your neighbor's yard, and I probably haven't even used the right word. So if you're unsure, talk to somebody that's part of your bar that understands your rules. But for most people that are able to take retainers, this can mitigate some of that danger that comes with having large receivables and that you're unable to collect on later from complicated clients. The other thing that we love to talk about is credit card payments. 57% of invoices that get shared that have the ability to get credit card payments are paid within the same day, and we find that 85% are paid within a week. It's a powerful tool that'll let you get paid faster, and it's also very convenient for a lot of your clients. I know it doesn't work for everybody, but it's something very strong to consider. And it also has a number of features that make those difficult to collect situations just a little bit easier. The first of which is this new feature that we've sent that is called the Outstanding Balances page. What this lets you do is it lets you see the outstanding balances for all of your clients on one page and lets you share with just a few clicks, being able to filter by when they last paid the bill and soon by when you last shared the bill with them. If you have Clio Payments enabled, they will see this link at the bottom of the email along with access to all of their invoices. If they follow that link, they'll be brought to a page where they can pay that balance down. But sometimes that balance is too big to pay all at once. And something that we found that a lot of clients find very helpful is payment plans. This allows your client to pay down the balance in regular amounts, and that'll help deal with larger outstanding balances. This can also be used for trust. You can set up an amount that you'd like to achieve with trust and start receiving regular payments from their credit card before you've billed them. This again goes back to being able to recoup some of that cost or mitigate some of that danger by taking some funds up front. And it also sets your client up as they've already started paying that. They already are in the habit of paying you for your services. You can see that here you can pick the interval as well as the start date, and then you're able to select both operating and trust accounts from the menu. So that's a little bit about professional fees. I'm going to hand it over to Amrit to talk about reimbursable expenses.
Alrighty, so before we jump into chatting about reimbursable expenses, we need to outline some parameters of what Clio can and cannot do. So, Clio can manage your expenses related to your reimbursables. So those are things that incur because of a byproduct of you providing your services as a lawyer. However, we do not have functionality around operating expenses. So those are things like rent and advertising and payroll. With that being said, reimbursable expenses in Clio, we divide them into two buckets. So we look at expenses as hard costs and soft costs. If we zoom in here, you can see that before you put an expense into Clio, you'll have to, if you enable this function, you can put it into either a hard cost or a soft cost. And the next step here is we have an expense category. Similar to time categories, you can put down exactly what the expense is and have that as a pop-up every single time you create an expense. And this will ensure that you have uniform wording for all invoices when you send them to your clients. And again, as James has mentioned, clean data. If you don't have an expense entry that you've already have there, you can click Create New Expense Entry on the fly without even having to leave the page. And that'll set you up to go from there. Alrighty, let's define these words a little bit more. So hard costs are those costs that are attributable to a vendor. So when you pick hard costs, you will likely see two new fields come up, and that's your reference field and your vendor field. This will allow you to match that expense to either a PO, an invoice, or even a check number. On the other hand, soft costs, these are costs that are not directly attributable to a vendor. So these might be things like photocopying or printing costs, things like that. I actually have learned that there are specific bars that allow you to charge a specific rate for a customer or client, sorry. So once you're back in your office, I would check with your bar to see if that's possible. In conclusion, hard costs are usually those that you pay on behalf of your client, whereas soft costs are those costs that are incurred as a byproduct of you providing your services as a lawyer. This is a really good time for me to mention the Clio mobile app again. We want to ensure that we're keeping the data clean. This app also allows the functionality for you to put those expenses into the hard cost bucket or the soft cost bucket. We really want to promote the usage of this because it will help you maintain clean data. Alrighty, those are reimbursable expenses in Clio. So we've chatted about professional fees, we've chatted about reimbursable expenses, and now we have to chat about revenue. The revenue report in Clio is something that we've created so you can calculate what your revenue is looking like. On the slide here, this is an exported CSV of what the revenue report looks like. I've hidden a couple columns just so we can really focus on calculating revenue. And the two that I really want to focus on are your unbilled time and your billed time. These two columns, if you add those up together, that equals your total professional fee revenue. On the other hand, you have your unbilled expenses and your billed expenses. These two are the total reimbursable expenses that you can calculate once you add those up. So if you take those four columns, that should be your total revenue balance. You have that revenue balance, you send your clients the invoice, your client pays you. And now that will show up in these last couple columns on the right-hand side of your screen that shows collected. So this is the balance that your clients paid you for. Let's say, for example, you have an invoice for $100. Your client has paid you $70. There's $30 out there outstanding. What we're noticing is a lot of our clients are using our credit note functionality to record that $30 as unpayable. You had a discussion, they're not going to pay it. Maybe you didn't even have that discussion and they're just not going to pay it. You can go in there and you can write that $30 in there and it'll clear out that invoice. All right, that wraps up the discussion about expenses. Now we can finally, or almost, chat about profit. But before we get there, we want to talk about operating expenses. And I want to reiterate, because Clio does not manage operating expenses, we've created relationships with QuickBooks. And James will have that discussion with you.
All right. So we have a number of accounting syncs Clio connects to. We're going to start with QuickBooks Online because we've added a couple features to it and we'd like to go through those. But we'll also take a quick look at connecting with Xero as well as exporting to QuickBooks Desktop, and for those of our customers that are in Europe, integrating with Client. To start with, we've added the feature that lets you add bill prefixes to invoices that are exported from Clio to QuickBooks. This is the top of the settings page where you're able to select a start date, what that prefix would look like. Once that's in QuickBooks, you'll see that Clio adds this Clio prefix. Now this lets you distinguish clearly between invoices 1 and 5 that came from Clio and invoices 1 and 5 that were potentially in QuickBooks to begin with. Clio will also export all of the customers, all of the clients that are associated with those invoices as customers in QuickBooks. Next up, we have our products and services. This lets us map things in Clio to the correct products and services in QuickBooks. You can see here that we've separated hard and soft cost expenses in order to be able to separate those in QuickBooks as well. Most of this is the same. And then once you're in QuickBooks, you're able to do reports on those expense types separately. One of the new features that we've added recently as well is the ability to sync over the user that is associated with individual line items. This uses the QuickBooks Online Classes feature, which is available in the QuickBooks Online Plus tier. Once you've created a class in QuickBooks Online, you're able to select it here as the field that Clio will sync over the name of the attorney that is connected to that line item. Now that you're viewing that invoice in QuickBooks Online, you can see exactly who that attorney was, as well as being able to use QuickBooks Online reporting features to use this field. Next up is the trust transaction section. The options for trust transaction haven't changed. Again, this trust can be a complicated feature to look through, so if you have any questions, make sure that you understand or you work with someone that understands your context to set this up properly. Otherwise, they've just got a new coat of paint. So one of the ways that we've broken from our traditional syncing functionality, which generally goes from Clio to QuickBooks, is in the area of hard costs. We understand that QuickBooks Online has a pretty significant, convenient hard cost functionality that allows you to do stuff like print checks. For firms that have already been entering these hard costs into QuickBooks Online and then re-entering them to Clio, we're eliminating that double entry by taking those hard costs out of QuickBooks Online and adding them to Clio. Here you can select a date to start this process from, as well as the account that you are entering those hard costs in QuickBooks Online. When you're creating that hard cost in QuickBooks Online, make sure you select the correct category that you've connected in Clio, and then select a Clio user, or Clio contact as the customer, and Clio will be able to connect that expense, create that expense, and connect it directly to the customer on the Clio side. And then, if there's a single matter for that client in Clio, Clio is able to send it directly to that matter, and you can invoice it from there. If the client has multiple matters, it'll be connected to the client, but you'll have to send it to the right matter. So that's it for QuickBooks Online. Taking a look at Xero. Xero connection is a little bit more simple. Just like the QuickBooks Online page, you have the option to set the different products and services that you want to connect the Clio items and send them over to Xero. We haven't made many changes to the Xero integration. We have a team that is currently working on making it a little bit more robust, and we have plans for it for the future for sure. But for now, the Xero sync has not changed in the last little while. The next option that a lot of people use is exporting to QuickBooks Desktop. So this is accessed from the Bills page in the Export Transaction setting. The first time you do this, you'll want to make sure that the QuickBooks export options are sending the items to the correct accounts in your QuickBooks Desktop account. So take a look at your QuickBooks Desktop account. If the company in QuickBooks Desktop was set up as a legal services company, Clio's defaults will map correctly to that, but it's always good to go through with your accountant, or if you have control of the QuickBooks account, to take a quick look and make sure that Clio is going to send it to the right places. Next up, you can select a date a date range to do these transactions on. If it's your first time, selecting all transactions will work just fine, but otherwise most people will select, for example, a monthly period where they'll export those invoices and payments and get them into QuickBooks Desktop. Once you've selected the date range, the default setting of IIF is most likely what you need to import into QuickBooks, and that'll let you import into QuickBooks. Jumped ahead of myself a little bit here. When you're importing, we highly recommend that you back up your company first, just in case something happens, and you're able to easily recover that and redo that import. That way, if, for example, you had the wrong settings in Clio and all of the items got sent to the wrong account in QuickBooks Desktop, then you can undo that, fix the settings, and then redo that easily. The process is similar for syncing over the balances and transactions from your operating or trust accounts. You would just do the same thing in the accounts page on the side, and then again the export transactions tab. And the settings there would be the same as the settings here. Finally, for our customers in the EU, clients, a legal accounting software, has built-in integration with Clio. There are a number of options here to set up. So if you have any questions about this, I highly recommend booking time with our Smart Bar to go through what you can do here. Again, this option is only available for customers in the EU. Now that we've got our accounting sync set up correctly, we'd work with our accountant, or if we understand how, adding our operating expenses directly into QuickBooks Online. That way you're able to do proper reports on the full firm financials there, and we can move on to calculating profit.
All right, let's talk about profit. So we've talked about professional fees and reimbursable expenses. So that makes up your revenue. We've talked about operating expenses, and then you take those two together and we have profit. Profit is how much you have earned at the end of the day. So it's taking what you have in Clio, combining that with whatever is in your accounting software to give you an output number. So the more vigilant we are about collecting this data, it'll help us answer questions like, who can we be charging more, who is not paying up for their services, and which matters are taking longer than others. Answering questions like these will ensure that the bread and butter of what you do is earning you an income. Earning an income. What does that really mean? To me, as an accountant, that means earning an income above and beyond all of my spendings, both tangible and intangible. So you have an office, and you pay rent for that office. That rent is a tangible expense. However, when you were looking for that office, you had to look around. So you spent time looking for that office. You spent time negotiating contracts with the landlord, and you spend time every single month sending funds to your landlord. All that time spent is intangible, which can be very difficult to monetize, because essentially what you're asking is, what is that time worth? Which can be translated to, how much do you see yourselves worth? Now, that's a difficult question. Don't know if Clio can tell you how much you are worth, but we can help you, with that first line. How do you maximize revenue? We can look at professional fees and reimbursable expenses and look at your efficiencies for how you can build out the maximum revenue. And we can do that by providing you 2 pointers right off the bat. If you were at George's talk earlier this morning, he might have mentioned these as well. So one of those is focusing on client experience. People love to be treated well. And if you do, they'll talk about you to their friends and their family, and then their friends and family would come to you. Focusing on client experience ensures that you bring in and retain more clients. Second up, focus on firm efficiencies. Ensure that your lawyers are spending their 8 hours a day on revenue-generating cases. We want to ensure that in those 8 hours, we maximize the amount of hours that are billable. And to help with this, Clio is currently building out 3 performance metrics. The first of them is the realization rate. This is the number of hours you've invoiced divided by the number of billable hours worked. This will best help you understand how accurate you are at charging your customers for the work that you've done. Currently, this is sitting at 81%. Next up, we have the utilization rate. This is the number of billable hours worked divided by the number of hours in a day. So it's about 31% right now. So about 30% of the time, we are actually charging the client for the work that we've done for them. I think we could improve that number a bit. And lastly, the collection rate. This is just how good are you after you've sent the invoice, how good are you receiving that money? And we're sitting at about 85%. All 3 of these rates will be in the firm dashboard that you have early access to. So if you make your way over to the Clio Lab, either you already have today or tomorrow, you can go there, get a feel for it, and maybe even be able to try out what level of efficiency your firm's currently sitting at. And also, if you were at George's earlier talk today about the legal trends report, we had a couple very interesting insights. If we split up the market into 2 types of firms, you have your growing ones and your stable ones, and then you have those that are shrinking. The growing and stable firms are showing that they are increasingly billing more time. That allows them to maintain higher realization rates and higher collection rates. With that being said, although shrinking firms are still doing the same amount of work, they don't always charge for the work that they do, and unfortunately, that can actually lead to them not receiving payment for their invoices. So what's the goal? We want to put everyone in the bucket of growing or stable. So the first step of that is we want to manage expectations. Please have incredibly authentic, realistic conversations when you're intaking clients. Let them know how much time you will spend on that case, how much time you'll be away from family dinners and friends and hangout sessions with your friends to ensure that your client is well taken care of. We're noticing that about 3 hours of unplanned work occur each week for a lawyer. This can lead up to 4 weeks of unplanned work in a year. So what are the numbers telling us? The numbers are telling us that you actually don't know that you're doing more work. And because you don't know that you're doing more work than you think you do, you're not always charging for it. Second up, once you've managed the expectations, we need to figure out if your client can actually pay for the service. If yes, that's great. If no, what else are you receiving from them? If we're not getting cash, are we getting experience from them? Are we getting feedback? At the end of the day, we want to be paid for our services, whether it's cash or something else. And lastly, collection. Oh, I went ahead of myself. Alrighty, collection. As an accountant, I'm also not that comfortable talking about money. I mean, even if I am sometimes, I can tell that I'm talking to someone who's uncomfortable having that conversation, and then I'm uncomfortable again, and now we're both just trying to get rid of that conversation. However, we have a business to run, we have bills that need to be paid, and lights to keep on. So, we need to ask people to pay for their services. And because it's awkward, I have a couple tips. If you send out your invoice and the person does not respond, email them 1 week later a friendly reminder email. Hey, this is just a friendly reminder. I sent you an invoice last week. Please pay. But say it in a better way than that. And then if they don't respond to that second email, give them a call the next week. That call, once you're at the calling stage, you can keep calling them. They're ignoring you. Don't be afraid to be naggy. But if they are responding to you, we can back up a little bit. They'll probably pay you sooner or later. They're just not getting to it quite just yet. With all of this being said, there is a small caveat to all of this. We need to ensure that as lawyers, we're responding to all emails and phone calls from clients within 24 hours. We need to take that responsibility that, hey, I'm right here, so pay me. And lastly, I will mention again what James had mentioned earlier, the outstanding balance page. This is amazing if you don't want to deal with, that conversation of collecting payments. It lets you send out an email to all of your clients with unpaid invoices at once. And if you actually have the Clio payments enabled as well, the pay online button will show up for them, and they can go in there, put in their credit card information right away, and take it off your hands completely. Alrighty, now that we've had a conversation about professional fees, reimbursable expenses, we've chatted about revenue, we've chatted about operating expenses, and we've had a conversation about profit. I just did this.
Yeah, so we want to reiterate the importance of the good data. So as you're entering that data into Clio, that's what's going to be key to getting those honest answers from reporting, whether it's in QuickBooks, whether it's in Xero, or whether it's in Clio. We hope that you're able to find, through some of this data, some opportunities to grow your firm. Clio will keep trying to build features that help you spend more time as a lawyer and less time as an accountant. That's all for our presentation. I'd like to open it up for some questions now. And we've got a mic coming out. Thank you.
Okay, so you talk about profit, looking at it as an overview from the firm's standpoint. We deal primarily in flat fee matters, and with Clio, when you designate a matter as flat fee, the way that it handles that is changing the billable rate to 0, which thus identifies the value of each slip being 0. How do you go about tracking the profitability by matter? How much value of time that you have invested in comparison to the fee you charged. If you charge a $10,000 fee, do you have $8,000 worth of work in it? Do you have $15,000 worth of work in it?
Yeah, so Clio has the ability to export time entries, so you can go by matter and you can take a look at the amount of time that you spent on that matter. We also have productivity reports that you can run to compare to exactly how much you made on that matter. But what I would highly recommend is go chat in our smart bar and talk to somebody, because they'll be able to figure out, you can tell them exactly how you work, and they'll be able to work out how you can correlate what your revenue is compared to the work that you put into that matter.
There's a lady over there in the pink.
When you were showing us the time entry, is there a way to see a day at a glance to make sure you've accounted for the full 8 hours or 12 hours, however many hours you've worked that day?
Absolutely. So when you're on the activities screen, you're able to filter. There's plenty of filters, so you're able to filter by that day, and then also filter down to the user, so you can see exactly that day how many time entries you added in. And that's a great point as well, because then you can see, hey, I've only actually recorded 6 hours today. Where did those 2 hours go? I mean, maybe it was a long lunch, or maybe you actually forgot to include that 2-hour work that you did. And that's something that you can remember to do. So, yeah.
Can you memorize that kind of filtering so that you don't have to filter it every day? Or do you have to filter it every day? to see that report?
Well, the activities page is kind of a general page, so it would be able to, it gives you a lot of options for filtering, so we don't save exactly what you've filtered down to look at it every time,
Okay.
no.
Kind of make it a memorized report.
Pardon?
Kind of make it a memorized report.
Exactly. If you have an idea though how that could work for you, I'd highly recommend going down to the Clio lab and giving us that feedback, because that's the kind of stuff we love to hear. Any other questions? Keep them coming.
So for time entry, time entry is so full of fraud for employees. It doesn't sound like there is an option to have an approval process by a manager or somebody above that person recording the time. Do you sync with T-sheets or anything like that so that that time entry can also be used for payroll in some way?
I'm not sure about an integration with T-sheets. That's something that you might want to, again, head to the smart bar to ask about that. But the idea that you want to be able to look at basically a time card for your employees,
Right.
and
So like if it's a paralegal's time and everything, so they're not having to record their time in T-sheets and also record their time in Clio so that the two match.
Yeah, no, I would definitely go take a look. Because I'm not 100% sure. I think we've got nearly 200 integrations at this point, so I've stopped keeping track after a little while. But that's a great point, and I think we'd love to hear that kind of thing is something that would be really useful to you, because it does sound something that's useful to a lot of people.
I do want to add to that. I used to be an auditor, and I really want to say thank you for bringing that up. That's a great idea. And I'll share that with everyone. Yeah.
Yeah, do we have any other questions? Oh, all the way in the back.
Ryland's got you.
So if you were to add a discount, like a dollar discount at the end of an invoice, how does Clio determine which lawyer those discounts come off?
It depends on which report is running, because that's the point at which Clio decides how we have to do it. Generally, Clio's going to distribute that across, because it's an invoice level discount, we're going to distribute that across all of the time entries on that invoice. So what you can do otherwise, if you'd like to take it off a specific item, you're also able to do line item level discounts to specify which attorneys that's going to come from.
But I think the problem is that later on you have to do revenue reports to determine how much was discounted per lawyer. I mean, unless you specified it, there's no way to know unless you ran the reports to determine who was getting dinged.
Right,
correct?
so the report, yeah, so if it's at an invoice level, then Clio would, yeah, you're right, it would distribute that discount across those attorneys that have funds on that, and you would...
But is it based on the percentage of time each lawyer worked?
Correct, yeah, so it would be equally distributed across the time entries based on, it would essentially be turned into a percentage discount, yeah.
If that's all the questions we have. One more? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so the Clio, like I said, the one situation where we take out of QuickBooks is that expense, the hard cost workflow, and that's because QuickBooks specifically has that has a bunch of stuff that Clio doesn't have that we know a lot of people use. In order to get full invoice and time tracking out of QuickBooks and into Clio, yeah, you would need to go through something like Zapier in order to get the full flow. Gentleman at the front here.
Ryland, he's heard it. You have to use the microphone. If I have to, you have to too.
There you go. Very non-technical question. Is there a preference that, I know QuickBooks or QBO is what a lot of people use, but is there a preference that Clio, your syncing ability is best with a certain one? If somebody was looking to move to a accounting software that a firm uses, that we have a choice, where's our good starting point? Is there something you guys like best?
QBO is that software. That's one where we've really dived into creating that sync and that relationship. And we are building it out with Xero as well and Client. So I think those two would be the two runner-ups. That's why we focused our discussion on the three.
But also, your accountant probably has an opinion, and that one is probably the one that they'll work best in. So you want to kind of figure out what is the balance of what is easiest for you and what is the best for them as well. So yeah. Great. If we have no other questions, thank you all for coming and here listening to us.
James, I think there's one more question at the back.
Oh, we got more questions.
Sorry, just taking me a while.
Sorry, I actually have 2 more questions. So
Keep
one,
them
if
coming.
a client makes a partial payment, does Clio apply it to the legal fees first before the expenses, or how is it allocated?
Again, that depends on the report you're running. I don't know off the top of my head how each report will designate those fees, but when you run the report, that's where that report itself will decide, this is either it'll be equally across or time first or expenses first.
So if you were to add a credit note later for the amount they didn't pay, how would we know how much was actually allocated to unpaid legal fees versus unpaid expenses?
Exactly. So when you're adding it to that invoice, Clio doesn't at that time determine it. So Clio is essentially agnostic to whether or not that gets applied. It's the report itself that decides, hey, like when I'm telling you this is how much you made on this invoice, that report is going to be the one that decides that. And And
Actually,
yeah, so I highly recommend, this is again like something our incredibly helpful support agents in the Smart Bar will know the best, and they'll be able to tell you which of those will designate across which items.
And I'm sorry, I have one more question.
Yeah.
Is there a single report that will tell you how much time a lawyer has spent per practice area? Because right now I'm having to produce reports one by one to determine each practice area time, like the productivity by lawyer, but there is no one single report that says this person spent 50% on litigation, 50% on transactional.
I don't believe there is a report. So if that's something that would be useful for you, please head over to the Clio Lab. And again, if you've heard something today, a suggestion that any of you find useful, the more of you that go to the Clio Lab and let us know, the more likely we are to hear, hey, there's actually dozens of people that want this. So we'd love for you to go to the Clio Lab if you have a list and bring that up to them, because that's definitely something we want to be keeping track of. That kind of report is, yeah, that sounds like something that could be useful. Thank you. We'll wait an extra minute here. It looks like we're all done.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, folks.